So after Plucky was killed at McClellan Station, then you have this conversation. You have a young Tecumseh, because Tecumseh was only a kid, in the 1776. And Tecumseh, his name means panther in the sky. So Tecumseh was listening to the Shawnee war chiefs Blackfish and Cornstalk were arguing back and forth. Chief Cornstalk wanted peace. He's the one that signed the peace treaty with Lord Dunmore to honor the treaties. But Blackfish wanted war because of what happened to Chief Plucky. Chief Plucky was a Shawnee sub-chief of Blackfish's. So Blackfish took ownership over Plucky, even though he was Mingo chief. Blackfish was second in command under Cornstalk, but eventually Chief Blackfish becomes the Shawnee war chief after Cornstalk is assassinated in 1777. In the fall of 1777, Cornstalk made a diplomatic visit to Fort Randolph, an American fort at present-day Point Pleasant, West Virginia, seeking as always to maintain his faction's neutrality. Cornstalk, Shawnee war chief, was detained by the fort commander, who had decided on his own initiative to take hostage any Shawnees who fell into his hand. When on November 10th an American militiaman from the fort was killed nearby by unknown Amerindians, angry soldiers brutally executed Chief Cornstalk, his son Elenipsico, and two other Shawnees. So while they're not even prisoners of war, they had gone there to assert their neutrality. We don't want to know the business. We're not part of this. We want to honor the treaties. They killed their allies, okay? So a militiaman in the fort killed Cornstalk. American political and military leaders were alarmed by the murder of Cornstalk, since Cornstalk was the only hope of securing Shawnee neutrality at the insistence of Patrick Henry. So this was the American colonists and American militiamen under Patrick Henry, governor of Virginia. Cornstalk's killers, whom Patrick Henry called vile assassins, were eventually brought to trial, but since their fellow soldiers would not testify against them, all were acquitted. So no justice for Cornstalk. Even though the governor is like, oh, vile assassins, but, who gives a shit, right? It's Patrick Henry. He's a slave owning. He's got a plantation. He's looking for the land. He doesn't give a shit. Cornstalk, Shawnee chief, was killed in 1777 as a prisoner of war. The assassination of the Shawnee peace chief who was offering peace. Instead, Patrick Henry evidently wanted unconditional surrender. The assassination of a peaceful prisoner of war, a Shawnee chief, would be repeated again in less than 10 years later, in November 1786, when Hugh McGarry, who was the psychopath who was blamed for the loss of the Battle of Blue Licks, the last battle of the American Revolutionary War in northern Kentucky, he savagely murdered Shawnee war chief Muluntha. In 1786, threatened with war by Richard Butler and George Rogers Clark, Muluntha was among the Shawnee leaders who signed the Treaty of Fort Finney. So again, it's a peaceful person. They signed a peace treaty, and immediately before Benjamin Logan's raid commenced, Benjamin Logan ordered his men not to kill any of the Shawnee that might choose to surrender. During the battle, Shawnee war chief Muluntha was covered by William Little and surrendered to him. Muluntha was brought into the custody of Hugh McGarry, and Logan reiterated his order that the prisoners not be harmed. Hugh McGarry, who once fed a dead Amerindian to his dogs, still bitter about his defeat at the Battle of Blue Licks, asked Shawnee war chief Muluntha, "Were you there? Were you at the defeat of the Blue Licks?" And the aged chief misunderstood the question, answered in the affirmative, and then that's when Hugh McGarry immediately killed Muluntha with an axe. Just chopped him up with an axe. Took an axe and just kept on hitting Muluntha till he was dead. Captain Benjamin Logan relieved Hugh McGarry of command and court-martialed him. Shawnee war chief Muluntha's son, Spimaka Lawba, survived Benjamin Logan's raid. He was brought back to Kentucky and raised by Benjamin Logan, eventually became known as Captain Benjamin Logan. So, wonderful. Muluntha's son is raised by Benjamin Logan. He becomes Benjamin Logan himself. Tecumseh, the Panther in the Sky, cited Muluntha's death as an example of broken promises by the United States. Simon Kenton was captured by the Shawnee in September 1778. 10-year-old Tecumseh watched Simon Kenton get brutally tortured with great disgust. The next morning, just in the nick of time, yet another powerful intervention saved Simon Kenton's life. This time, it was orchestrated by Chief Johnny Talgahyeetah Logan and Simon Girty. In 1779, the year after Simon Kenton's escape, Kentucky and Ohio Amerindians began an Indian revolution, an Indian rebellion, Amerindian insurgency, a counter-assault with the assault on the Kentucky settlements in order to end the invasion of their homeland and their homelands of their ancient ancestors. Because remember, Kentucky is the homeland of the Shawnee Amerindians. This is where they lived. This is where they lived the entire time when white people got here. This is where their ancestors lived. Kentucky is Shawnee homeland. So when the Amerindians started attacking more settlements, this was when George Rogers Clark assembled the Kentucky militia to rout the Amerindians towns along the Little Miami River in Ohio, which was mostly Shawnee. So newly appointed to the rank of captain and placed in charge of the militia scouts and spies, Simon Kenton was once again at the forefront of a dangerous mission into Ohio. Chillicothe and the other towns were burned, along with the corn crop ripening in the fields nearby. So this is George Rogers Clark, Benjamin Logan, Simon Kenton, going throughout Ohio, just burning down Shawnee towns, burning down Chillicothe, just all along the Little Miami River. Just burning villages, just genociding, massacring entire villages. Just like Hiroshima, just like Nagasaki, just like what the Pilgrims, the Puritans did to the Wampanoag chief, what the Pilgrims did to the Pequot. Complete massacre. Killed everybody. Nobody survives. The Taino Indian, what Columbus did with the Taino Indian, complete massacre. Nobody lives. Full warfare. And that's terrorism, when you attack the civilian population for political reasons. So this is Simon Kenton, George Rogers Clark, Benjamin Logan, all engaging in terrorism. So burning down Chillicothe, burning down towns, burning their corn crops, which were ripening in the fields nearby. Benjamin Logan also joined in total war campaigns. He was with them all. The terrorism against the Shawnee Indians north of the Ohio River on the Little Miami River, serving under George Rogers Clark. However, Benjamin Logan and George Rogers Clark frequently disagreed over strategy. Clark was outright brutal and genocidal, whereas Logan wanted his genocidal tactics to be covert and subtle. In 1780, Jean-Baptiste Point du Sablé, an African from Haiti, set up a settlement to trade furs with the Native Americans on the north bank of the Chicago River. His trading post was called Chicago, and it grew prosperously and eventually became the city of Chicago, one of the largest cities in the world. So Chicago was started by an African from Haiti who set up a settlement which he was able to grow prosperous because of the fur trade with the Native Amerindians. After American independence, Benjamin Logan became active in the campaign to establish Kentucky as a separate state. Benjamin Logan, one of the founders, one of the founding fathers of Kentucky, was a genocidal maniac. Isaac Shelby, first governor of Kentucky, genocidal maniac. In fact, 1/3 to 2/3 of those who fought in the War of 1812 were Kentuckians. So you have, after the independence, Benjamin Logan wants to establish Kentucky as a separate state. Benjamin Logan served as the Kentucky's representative in the Virginia House of Delegates from 1781 until 1787, when he began arguing for statehood. In late 1786, Benjamin Logan led a force of United States Army regulars and Kentucky mounted militiamen against the Shawnee towns in the Ohio country along the Mad River. Another expedition, another raid, bunch of massacres, more genocide. They were lightly defended since the warriors were away attacking settlements in Kentucky. Benjamin Logan engaged again in total warfare, terrorism, seized and burned the Indian villages. This is 86, so he's doing the same thing. They also burned Chillicothe again. Chillicothe was the Shawnees' capital, and they kept on establishing and reestablishing themselves. So there's actually like 5 or 6 locations that was called Chillicothe. So Benjamin Logan burns more villages down, burns Chillicothe, destroys the food supplies, kills, captures many, including Chief Maloonta, and Maloonta was subsequently murdered by Hugh McGarry. Maloonta, or Malunthi, was a chief of the Shawnee people following the death of Cornstalk. Benjamin Logan's raid and the death of their chief Maloonta, again a Shawnee prisoner of war, angered the Shawnee, who retaliated by escalating their attacks, which led to the Northwest Indian War, aka Little Turtles War. So, George Rogers Clark, Benjamin Logan, they're attacking. Now there's an Indian War, a greater, larger Indian War that's going on. It's a 60 years war. American Revolution wasn't just a blip in the historical timeline. It was part of a bigger events that were going on. And the bigger events was a white civil war, which was dedicated to stealing Amerindian land. The salvacious greed of the European colonists could not be quenched and satisfied until all the Native Americans were wiped out. So Benjamin Logan, again, he causes the death of Maloonta, and Maloonta, the murder of Maloonta, that is what one of the main reasons for Tecumseh's fight of the Northwest Indian War, Little Turtles War. Also Blue Jacket was part of it. Benjamin Logan was one of those calling for the Danville Convention. He was a delegate when the Danville Convention wrote the first Kentucky Constitution in 1791 and 1792. Following statehood, Benjamin Logan served in the Kentucky House of Representatives from 1792 to 1795. Benjamin Logan ran unsuccessfully for governor in 1796 and in 1800. In 1802, Benjamin Logan died of a stroke at age 60, his home 6 miles southwest of Shelbyville, Kentucky. He was buried in the family cemetery. So good thing he wasn't elected in 1800, because he eventually dies of a heart attack in 1802. The Northwest Indian War, 1785 to 1795, also known as Little Turtles War and other names, was a war between the United States and a confederation of numerous native tribes for control of the Northwest Territory. It followed centuries of conflict over this territory, first among Native American tribes, and then with the added shifting alliances among the tribes and the European powers, France, Great Britain, and their colonials. Under the Treaty of Paris, 1783, which ended the American Revolutionary War, Great Britain ceded the U.S. control of the Northwest Territory, which was present-day Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Michigan, and Minnesota, and they all were occupied by numerous Native American tribes. Despite the treaty, the British kept forts and policies that supported the natives in the Northwest Territories. President George Conotokarius Washington directed the United States Army to murder at will. So this is the president, first president, father of the country. The U.S. Army consisting of mostly untrained recruits, supported by equally untrained militiamen, suffered a series of major defeats, including the Har Mar Campaign, 1790, and St. Clair's defeat, 1791, which were resounding Native Amerindian victories. About 1,000 soldiers and militiamen were killed, and the United States forces suffered many more casualties than their opponents. After St. Clair's disaster, President George Conotokarius Washington ordered Revolutionary War hero General Mad Anthony Wayne to organize and train a proper fighting force. General Mad Anthony Wayne took command of the new Legion of the United States late in 1793. He led his men to a decisive victory at the Battle of Fallen Timbers in 1794. The defeated native tribes were forced to cede extensive territory, including much of present-day Ohio, in the Treaty of Greenville, 1795. These battles, these fights was happening in Ohio, today, in Ohio. So right after the American Revolutionary War, you got Washington just sending all these armies to murder all the Indians in Ohio and the so-called Northwest Territory. So Indiana, Illinois, Michigan, and Minnesota, Washington is sending his army up there to gain the sovereignty of his land, which was the point of the American Revolution. They wanted land. He was a plantation owner. They were land speculators. It was a white civil war dedicated to the proposition of stealing Amerindian land.